Good evening, universe. Tonight I'm going to be talking about all of the books that I read in the month of June. I am a little bit under the weather, so I apologize if you can hear that in my voice at all, but I do have a nice cup of chai here to soothe me and keep me going through this video. So let's get right into the books that I read. For June, I wanted to keep it a little bit more focused on queer reads in honor of Pride Month. I didn't want to limit myself to exclusively queer books, but in that general bent was the goal, and I kept to that pretty well. The first book I read is the odd one of the bunch because it is both not really a queer read from what I can tell, and also I did not finish it, which is why I can't be 100% certain, because who knows, there's always room for queerness to crop up in the middle of a book. So the first book was The Stormcrow by Kaylin Josephson. This had been on my TBR for May, but I didn't get around to it, so I wanted to read it this month. I was really excited to do so. The first couple of chapters started off great. I really thought I was going to enjoy this book, but as I continued to read, I just wasn't really attaching with any of the characters, and the voice was a little bit it was too much of a combination of trying to have a fantasy voice and also trying to have like a casual modern voice that I found it a little bit jarring. In addition, the romantic interest that was introduced, at least I think that it's going to be the romantic interest, I did not like that person at all. So let me back up and tell you what the book is actually about. So the book starts off in this kingdom with this princess, our main character, whose name I unfortunately cannot remember. I think it starts with an A. So she loves to ride crows because in this kingdom they have all of these giant magical crows, and they're kind of reminiscent of like dragons to me because each of them has elemental powers. So some of them like can breathe fire, others of them can control the weather and storms and stuff like that. And people who are trained to be crow riders will like become combatants. They're very powerful and they ride around on these crows and they work together in a very unique and magical way. And this is where her kingdom gets its power from. Basically, they're considered like too much of a threat with their magical crows to ever be attacked, because none of the other kingdoms have them. And then they have the rookery, I think it's called, where all the crows live and all their eggs are. And that's important because in like the first chapter, the rookery and all of the crows get burned down and all the crows die. This was a really unfortunate turn for me pretty quickly because I was really excited to see these crows in action. I love dragons and I love birds, and I thought this was a great combination of those two ideas, these magical crows with special abilities. So I was really bummed to see that happen, but not as bummed as the main character, who immediately gets PTSD. So it's from an attack on an enemy kingdom who is known for their ruthlessness. There's like an inside job type element. The main character immediately falls into a crushing depression. I think it's like 6 months go by where she's like barely gotten out of bed and all of her subjects think she's weak. Oh, her mother also dies, so that doesn't help. She's the second born princess, so her older sister is now like the queen. And the plot seemingly kicks off, not from this event exactly, but when the queen of the kingdom that did this is like, okay, you guys have to marry the second daughter to my son. That's the crux of the story, is that this main character has to deal with being married off to the son and trying to exact her revenge on the kingdom that did this. She has a way that she's going to do this, but it does get into kind of like surprise, spoilery type territory, so I'm not going to explain what it is, or at least I assume it's some kind of a spoiler. But the vibe that I was getting from this, I got to a page 126, the vibe that I was getting from this was definitely an enemies to lovers type situation, because you have the prince that she's going to be married to, I don't remember his name either. He is a complete jerk when they meet, and he puts up this obvious front of being like very cruel and calculating, and so there's like this back and forth with the hot-headed main character and this calculating, cruel prince character, and I just wasn't buying it. I assume that this is going to be in the vein of he will be redeemed, and it turns out he's like been under his mother's thumb and stuff like that. That's where I think the story is going. And I just wasn't connecting enough with either of the two of them to get that far. He was just too cruel offhand. I am a fan of Cardan from The Cruel Prince, but this guy, I don't know that he was meaner, but he was less charming about it. I just wasn't connecting with it, essentially, is what it came down to. And I didn't really like the princess that much either. I felt like she was a little bit too reckless, and also that she came from a little bit of a difficult position narratively, in that she is supposed to be like fiery and reckless and hot-headed, but also she's extremely depressed. So it was hard to show us both of those things at the same time and also make her a compelling. I don't necessarily need my characters to be likable, but I wasn't compelled by her. It to me was doing a little bit too much telling and not quite enough showing, especially with the attitude of the main character. And it seemed like it was definitely going in a more like court politics type direction, and I just wasn't in the mood for it. What I will say though is that I really enjoyed some of the mental illness representation. I really liked the way that a lot of her depression was shown, and that was part of the reason why I thought that I would definitely finish this book, that it might even be a new favorite, but it just really wasn't working enough for me with the other elements. So I decided to go ahead and DNF it. But if you've read it, please let me know if it does pick up again, if you found the rest of the book to be satisfying and worth your time. The next book I read was Sweet and Bitter Magic by Adrienne Tooley, or Audrian. So this is where the queer reads kick in. Oh, I will say in the Stormcrow, her best friend is a lesbian. So there is a little bit of a queer element. I like to have the main characters as the queer characters for my specifically queer reads though. And that's what this is. This is about a witch who has been cursed to be unable to love, as well as a young lady who also has magical powers, but she has kept them a secret because I think she lost a sibling to magic. So this book kicks off when these two make a deal in order to each get something that they want. So the witch who's unable to love, her name is Tamsin, and the other girl, her name is Ren. Tamsin, Ren. So I already told you that this is queer. This is a sapphic story, and basically they just go off on this adventure together. In this world, magic has really distinct costs. Most of the time, the cost comes from the witch that casts the magic. So it's exhausting or it hurts in particular ways in your body. But if you use dark magic, then it comes out of the world around you. It comes out of nature. And certain types of spells only can work as dark magic. You know the kind that I'm talking about. Usually that's going to be the bad stuff like necromancy or, really evil things. Basically things that would be banned usually from like regular witch learning. They're like murderous, death-raising, that kind of thing. That's dark magic. And when you use dark magic, it causes earthquakes and natural disasters and really severe climate change all at once. Sometimes it will also cause horrible plagues, and sometimes these plagues can have magical effects, which is what's happening in this book. So there's this plague that's causing everybody to forget everything. They have horrible amnesia. And Ren can see the magic, and because of that she's able to kind of avoid it, but it affects her father, who is the person that she loves the most. So she goes to the nearest witch, this mysterious witch that lives on the outskirts of town and is known for being very cruel and callous, and she goes to her. She's like, we have to find out who the witch is that's doing this so that we can reverse the effect that it's having on my father. And Tamsin says, yes, we can do this together. And then there's also like a bounty if you can find the witch that's causing these problems. And that comes from the Witchlands, which is where the geographic place where all the magical people live and learn. Tamsin, we know, is in exile for a horrible thing that she did. You don't get to know what the horrible thing is for a while. Part of the mystery of the book is unraveling exactly what happened that caused her to be exiled. And with that exiled, also her curse, which is that she cannot love. So Tamsin agrees to help Ren, and they're going to work together to get this witch. But Tamsin is hoping that by doing so, that she'll be allowed out of exile and be able to go back into the Witchlands. She's also making a deal with Ren that Ren has to give her the love that she has for her father in exchange for helping her. That's how Tamsin works. Every time she does a spell, she's like, yes, I'll do this magic for you and I'll take the cost with my body, but the price that you pay me is love. So like the first scene that we see her in, she tells a mother that she has to give away the love that she has for one of her children in order for Tamsin to use magic to heal the other child. So Tamsin says, I will help you and join you on this quest if you give me the love that you have for your father. Ren agrees to this, they strike a deal, and the two of them go on this adventure to track down the witch. And romance ensues. I liked this book, but it did not blow me away. I really liked their relationship sometimes. Other times I didn't really buy it, or I didn't really, feel it. The world building was pretty good, pretty interesting. There was a lot of what I felt were kind of heavy-handed moments, or moments where it would set up for a payoff, but it was really quickly. So it would be the setup, and then it would have an emotional payoff 3 paragraphs later. And it's okay, I can't really fully be invested at that level. I really needed this payoff to begin a lot earlier. And there were some other moments where it's obvious that the character development was consistent throughout. I really felt like I felt the author's intentionality a lot throughout this book. I kept remembering that I was reading it. I didn't feel fully immersed. I kept thinking okay, I can see what the author is doing here in order to make me believe that character depth has been achieved. So I enjoyed it. It just didn't really blow me away. It is once again an enemies to lovers type situation. Since it was dual perspective, I was able to see why they were kind of enemies at first and able to see their softening for each other. That all felt pretty realistic to me. There were certain moments when it was kind of well, I don't really 100% understand why this connection is happening. But for the most part, I thought it was good. I thought it was a fine sapphic YA fantasy. Again, that was Sweet and Bitter Magic by Adrienne Tooley. Next, continuing in the saga of The Eldest Curses by Wesley Chu and Cassandra Clare, was The Lost Book of the White. If you haven't read The Mortal Instruments, technically this is a spoiler, so skip on ahead to the next book if you don't want to hear it. Beginning now. This continues to follow Magnus and Alec in their relationship. I believe this one takes place after the events of the Mortal Instruments, a couple years after, because I think Jace and Clary are 19-ish in this. Magnus and Alec have adopted a child. They have a little baby warlock named Max. We don't spend too much time seeing them directly be fathers because an antagonist introduced in the previous book, as well as a much more surprising return from a character in Magnus's past. Those are the two main antagonists in this book. One of the first things that happens is that Magnus gets stabbed with a magical weapon that causes his magic to start to become different. So he and Alec are trying to figure out how to fix this problem. In the process, they realize that they have to go to Shanghai and they decide to bring reinforcements. This was one of the most wonderful parts of this, is that if you are a fan of the Mortal Instruments crew, Jace, Clary, Simon, Isabel, they're all here. That was really nice to have them be much more present. You also get more of Magnus's past in this in really heart-wrenching detail. I felt like these two authors found their footing working together a lot more in this book. I thought the banter was more fun and more believable. The plot was a little bit more engaging and the twists were more interesting and more twisty. Overall, I really enjoyed The Lost Book of the White. I think it is closer to the voice and the delight that there is in the mainline Shadowhunters books. Still not quite there for me, but I definitely feel like it was closer to that. I think that they have kind of found their groove with each other a little bit more, and I'm really looking forward to book 3, even though we have, as far as I know, no release date. I'm pretty sure that one is set to take place between the Dark Artifices and the Wicked Powers, so I imagine it's gonna be a little while. Then I took a little break from novels to read Magic Knight Rayearth by Clamp, the first volume. I was interested in this because of a panel that I saw on Magical Girls when I was at an anime convention like a month or two ago, and there were some elements of this that I really liked. This is a manga from a long time ago. I believe it's like early-ish 1990s. If you don't know Clamp, they also did a lot of other works, including Chobits, Cardcaptor Sakura, Tsubasa, Pollock, and a whole bunch of other things. They are a manga writing group, and so they have a really large body of work. So this was another of their pieces. It was, according to itself, a breakout piece. This follows 3 girls who get isekai'd, who get transported to an alternate dimension, and then they are asked to save it pretty much immediately upon arrival. They are 3 schoolgirls from Japan. They don't know each other. They just get whisked there because they are supposed to be the magical knights of prophecy and save the world from this like dark wizard guy. It seems like fun. I don't know if I'm going to continue. It reads a lot like an RPG. So it feels very distinctly like the girls are like, I talked to this character, so I have a spell now. Or I talked to this character, so I have a weapon now. And that's fun. I don't know if I'm going to continue borrowing the books because I have to get them transferred in from another library, and it's a little bit of a pain for the amount of enjoyment that I get from it. It did make me laugh a couple of times. I'm probably just going to watch the anime instead though. Each of the girls has like an element that they use. So like I think the main girl uses like fire, and then there's wind, and then there's water. And it seems fun, but it seems like the type of thing that I'll enjoy more as an anime. Speaking of cartoons versus their non-cartoon counterparts, The Rise of Kyoshi by FCE with the help of Michael Dante DiMartino, who is one of the creators of Avatar: The Last Airbender. I enjoyed this way more than I thought that I would, honestly. I thought I would like it and then like move on with my life, but it was definitely my favorite of the month and one of my top favorites from the year so far. So as you can tell by the title, this follows Kyoshi, which makes it a prequel to the Avatar: The Last Airbender series. It is a novel, so it's not like the graphic novel adaptations / continuations that we have. It's also a duology, and it also has a distinctly darker tone than the Last Airbender show does. Kyoshi's main goal throughout most of this book is to kill somebody. Not just like anybody, a very specific person. She wants to enact vengeance on them for a horrible act that they do, and she decides that she is going to use every power in her arsenal to try and enact vengeance upon them. If you have already seen Avatar: The Last Airbender, then you know what kind of powers Kyoshi is going to be bringing to this person, or at least you think that you do. We get a lot into her backstory and building up her accessing the types of powers that she'll come into. So this book covers kind of a lot of ground, and I really liked it, even though, so Kyoshi is not a very likable character, and I really enjoyed that about her. She is very serious and dour, often condescending, wrathful, and I just really enjoyed how little she put up with. She has a lot of anger to deal with, and I think a lot of, so I haven't read the second book yet, but I think a lot of what this duology will be about is her learning to manage her anger in healthy ways. It also deals with a lot of themes of justice, as well as one's place in the world and how the people around you shape that place in the world. Like I said, this book is distinctly darker than the Last Airbender series. Like, a lot of people definitely die on page. They die in sometimes really kind of gruesome ways. So know that going into it is not going to feel the same as The Last Airbender. I have only seen the first season of The Legend of Korra, but I think it would be closer to that realm. I also really enjoyed the romantic interest in this, and that person and Kyoshi's developing relationship and back and forth, and how that affects Kyoshi. I really liked all of that, and it was just fun to be back in this world and to kind of flesh out some of the history of the world, because it really, like, there are some things that are references to things that happen later in the Last Airbender series. You get information like why Kyoshi wears the makeup that she does, what is up with the fans, the outfit, so on and so forth. It really builds out this mythological character into somebody who is very human. At the same time, if you have seen The Last Airbender, it was really fun to get to see people make references to things, or things would start to happen, and it's like, oh, I know what that is. I've seen this from the show. I know what they're referring to. Where even like the characters don't know yet, but you do because you've seen the show. That kind of dramatic tension was really fun. And also seeing how the flaws at this point in the world's history become the flaws at the point in which The Last Airbender takes place. Seeing that kind of shift and root was really interesting. I also loved the voice. It wasn't too flowery, but it wasn't too plain. It was just really readable and enjoyable. The pacing was a little bit weird at certain parts, but mostly really enjoyable. Like I said, it is part of a duology, and it definitely lets you know that with the ending. It still did feel like a contained, completed novel on its own, but I am really looking forward to reading the second book in this duology and seeing what kind of an ending Kyoshi gets. Overall, I was just really pleasantly surprised by the Rise of Kyoshi. Highly recommend, especially if you are a fan of any of the Avatar series. And that was everything I read for June. It felt kind of like a okay, pretty good-ish month until I read the Rise of Kyoshi. Then that just rocketed right up. That was such a great read that I really feel much more satisfied with that last reading month. I hope your reading month in June was just as good, if not better, and have a beautiful night, universe.